I listened to a minister in the Ministry of Finance who is stating and blaming business people who buy and sell, but takes no responsibility whatsoever for a shortage, a lack of supply in foreign exchange. The job of the government of Trinidad and Tobago, who controls all the assets and the resources of a brilliant people, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, all the sun, the sand, the abilities to earn revenue, the creative culture, the sport tourism, the music, the entities, the environment. The government controls all of this. They have the cabinet, and yet they come here to say there is a shortage of foreign exchange, but we have no responsibility. It is those who are buying and selling in these types of businesses who are causing this, and that is causing the country to fail. I say shame on you, the government of Trinidad and Tobago, for not understanding your role. The fact that we have to ration foreign exchange, the fact that we are discussing facilities at the Exim Bank and whether 82% went to micro enterprises or whether it was really 28%, the fact that there is a shortage is the fault of the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. The mismanagement, the poor policies, the decisions that you have taken have left us in this position. So we must start there. And once we start there, we can understand where we are and where we are going and why so many businesses and so many people are suffering under this critical foreign exchange crunch. The Honorable Minister in the Ministry of Finance said that we in Trinidad and Tobago, we need to export. We need to stop the buy and sell mentality. Yet as I look across there, he's a member of the People's National Movement government who shut down Petrotrin, the refinery that was producing products, diversifying energy sector products, and exporting products to the world for decades. And he transformed, the PNM government transformed us into a buy and sell. We now have to buy fuel to sell to our people. We have to suffer our people because we do not make or produce any products because the refinery has been closed for 3 years and 7 months. So, Honorable Minister, I hope that you look at your cabinet colleagues and you berate them as you say that we should not be moving away from production and productive capacity into buy and sell. I am certain that those companies, the 11 companies that shut down over the last 3.5 years at Point Lisas, they were attempting to produce products downstream for export, which would have brought about generous supplies of foreign exchange. But these 11 companies and the companies at Point Lisas and Point Lisas that is now operating at 24% capacity do so because the PNM government, with the PNM Prime Minister, with the then PNM Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister, went to Houston in 2017, negotiated a gas price on behalf of NGC with the upstreamers. And since then, the upstreamers have been boasting of 67% increase in their profit margin. The problem for the rest of the country is that when the upstreamers boast of increased profits, someone else has to suffer because it is a zero-sum game. Unfortunately, the people, the coffers, the supply of foreign exchange of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago was forced to suffer because of the poor negotiating skills of the government in charge now. So to come here and try to blame small and micro enterprises and businesses who are trying to make and turn a profit when you are the government, you tell us that at every opportunity. You shout it upstairs and downstairs. And now when it's time to take responsibility, you try to pass the buck. the Honorable Minister in the Ministry of Finance said that demand outstrips supply. That's as simple as it is. Well, yes, it is simple. But who's in charge of creating the supply? Who's in charge of encouraging supply? Who's in charge of bringing US into the country and foreign exchange? It is you, Honorable Minister. You are in charge. So if the supply is short, it means that your policies have fallen short. It was very interesting to note. I'm happy to be here to listen to the Honorable Minister in the Ministry of Finance. It was quite shocking what he just said. The Honorable Minister just alerted this entire country to the sad realization that we are only producing 16,000 barrels of oil per day. He just stated that. And I had to take a deep breath. That is the lowest production of oil in the history of our country. 16,000 barrels a day. But the Honorable Minister hopes that by 2025, it will increase to 92,000 barrels a day. Well, that is very interesting, because under the United National Congress and the then Minister of Energy, the Honorable Kevin Ramnarine, in 2014, Trinidad and Tobago was producing 92,000 barrels of oil per day. So the PNM has been in power for 7 years. They require another 3 years to return to the UNC levels of oil production. I do not think you all should be proud about that. The Minister of Public Administration stated that 125 million US was spent or needed for French fries. Well, now I understand why this PNM government made 100 million US available to food importers through the Exim Bank. This is truly a roadmap to recovery for KFC. Why are we here? The government must ration because the government has failed to produce foreign exchange. End of story. Trinidad and Tobago is suffering from double Dutch disease. I believe that I've coined that phrase. If anyone else has said it before, I give them credit, but I've heard it, neither heard it nor read it anywhere. We may know about Dutch disease. For those of you who may not have heard the term before, Dutch disease is simply when you get or you're blessed with resources like Trinidad and Tobago, and you get an easy income from oil and gas, for example, that is there simply because God blessed our nation. That largesse and that money that comes in causes you to get lackadaisical, causes you to relax and know that money is always available, and therefore you do not focus on developing your other assets. You do not focus on diversification. You do not focus on developing different revenue streams. Trinidad and Tobago has long suffered from Dutch disease. But under this PNM government for the last 6 3/4 years, we are now suffering from double Dutch disease, because even the money that was so-called easy for decades under different administrations, including former PNM administrations, we now cannot collect because of the policies, the closure of the energy industry, the poor negotiations, the losses being made at NGC, the collapse of Point Lisas, the lack of effort and diversification in the agricultural sector, the movement away from sugar in 2004, and now the policy of this PNM and the Prime Minister that agriculture has no place because we do not have enough land space in order to produce enough to compete. This has led us to a position that we are now pariahs on the global stage, where we were once proud producers of products across the board. So we could hold our heads high and show off when we walk in Europe and we go to sporting events. We can wear our colors proudly because we would have provided the world with products made in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, unfortunately, due to the policies of this PNM, we are buy and sell. So the very government, the very minister in the Ministry of Finance who has turned us into buy and sell, comes to complain about the citizens being buy and sell. Those who do not know their history are doomed to repeat it. What we are experiencing now in terms of our Dutch diseased economy, economic contraction and foreign exchange crunch is the result of, once more, a total and complete lack of P&M planning, a total and complete lack of foresight, and a total and complete inability to consider anything beyond the short-sighted depletion of the Treasury for personal gain. Time and time again, the P&M's total incompetence in the fiscal and economic planning and foresight have landed this country into long, hard go-over seasons, time and time again. Something that a nation as resource-rich as ours should never, ever experience. Allow me to take us back some 40 years ago when the country was going through, curiously, similar conditions, the results of, curiously, similar chain of events. Allow me to quote from an article written by Dr. D. Conrad and J. Jagasan, published in 2018, titled Real Exchange Rate, Misalignment and Economic Growth. And I quote, during the period 1974 and 1982, for those of you who are younger than me, that was PNM government in charge. They went through an unfettered 30 years from 1956 to 1986. So this 1974 period to 1982 spans only the PNM. Trinidad and Tobago benefited immensely from positive oil shocks, which led to economic boom conditions in Trinidad and Tobago. Real GDP growth for the period averaged 4.6%, while foreign exchange reserves climbed from 768.3 million US dollars, TT dollars, in 1972 to 7.16 billion TT dollars in 1982, a dramatic increase, peaking in 1981 just before the death of the first Prime Minister of the PNM and Trinidad and Tobago, Eric Williams, 1981, 7.69 billion. Along with this, government expenditures rose sharply, and there was a commensurate fall in unemployment. So things were looking good because oil and gas was available. Trinidad and Tobago was becoming a world player. Our per capita income was rising, and we are among some of the highest in the world because of our small population with vast resources. The unprecedented boom was followed by an adverse movement in the country's terms of trade, which was precipitated by falling oil prices from a peak of US $39.60 per barrel in 1981 to less than $15 a barrel in 1986. This led to declining government revenues and mounting fiscal deficits, which grew from 1.4% to 13.1% of GDP in 1983. So what we saw again, as we are seeing now, was the then PNM government over-dependent on oil and gas, only being able to make money when the global prices were up, and the country would suffer when the global prices went down. We were price takers then, and 40 years later now, under another PNM regime, we are price takers once again, as stated by the Honorable Minister in the Ministry of Finance. So all of this PNM government for 54 years, we have been unable to change ourselves from price takers to price makers, to producers and to exporters. And the PNM comes here today to blame the small man. The government, which was the PNM government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, their policy then was to control imports. As we just heard the Honorable Minister in the Ministry of Finance state, at the end of his contribution, that the government, this PNM government's proposal and policy is to control imports, especially of cars, of luxury items and luxury foods. So we are hearing 40 years later, the same old PNM. Rather than devalue the local currency, and it must be noted here that I listened to all the debates of all the senators previously, and I did not hear any senator talk about the willingness or desire to devalue the currency, so I wasn't sure where the Honorable Minister was going with that. Consequently, back then, there was a system of ex-ante central bank controls over imports and the implementation of a wide array of tariffs, taxes, and subsidies. Does this sound like it is right now? Does it sound like we're in a time warp? There were no incentives back then for diversification, no incentives to develop alternative supplies or revenue streams, no buy local, no increase in agro-processing and agricultural land, no diversification in tourism, sport tourism, into manufacturing, no incentives for our people 40 years ago to diversify, and now the people get blamed, but not the PNM. In 1986, when international oil prices fell to less than $15 per barrel, Trinidad and Tobago experienced a precipitous fall in foreign exchange reserves, as is occurring now, because we are price takers under the PNM, and we still are price takers. Reserves fell to the equivalent of less than 2 months of import cover. This sounds similar, because when Kamla Persad-Bissessar and the United National Congress left office in 2015, there was $12.26 billion in reserves, 14.5 months of import cover. And as we speak here now under the People's National Movement, we are down to 7.5 months of import cover, heading to that figure, that world record figure of 2 months import cover back in 1986 after 30 unfettered years of PNM mismanagement. When international oil prices fell, Trinidad and Tobago experienced a precipitous fall. Reserves fell to the equivalent of less than 2 months. Between 1982 and 1987, earnings from the petroleum sector fell by almost 50%. We are seeing that today, not only in the oil and the lack of the refinery, but unfortunately we are a gas economy, and our gas production is low, our gas margins are low, and in a global climate, where global prices are rising, for the first time in our history, we are fearful of rising oil price, rising fuel price, because we are now in a double Dutch disease as the refinery remains closed. We also see almost a carbon copy PNM policy in the period 2016 to 2022 that has landed us where we are now. I now read from the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago 2016 Annual Economic Survey printed in 2017. The Trinidad and Tobago economy continued to contract in 2016. Adversity, this is all before COVID, because I hear COVID. You would believe that COVID began in September 2015. The Trinidad and Tobago economy contracted, and this was adversely impacted by a combination of domestic and external factors. If you listen to government members here, you would believe that it is simply global shocks and external factors and war in Ukraine and between Ukraine and Russia that impacts Trinidad and Tobago under the government, their policies, their domestic policies, and what they have failed to implement has no impact whatsoever. But anyone who understands knows that the combination of failed domestic policy and global shocks is bringing pain to each and every citizen across Trinidad and Tobago, exacerbated by the lack of foreign exchange, that lifeblood of business, of job creation, and of putting food on the table. In 2016, the local economy was largely set back by declines in the energy sector. Production indicators monitored by the central bank indicate that all subsectors of non-energy activity declined. What does that mean? That the PNM government failed to diversify. All other sectors declined. The lackluster economic performance the central bank continued of the local economy also had knock-on effects on the labor market. The latest available data from the CSO at that time indicated that the unemployment rate increased to 4.1% in the third quarter as compared to 3.4%. And this was before the influx of illegal immigrants, as Maduro was just becoming a dictator in Venezuela, and the economy of Venezuela was to crash 1 year later. This was all long before COVID. The fiscal deficit increased in fiscal year 2015 to 16 largely as a result of lower energy revenues. Estimates from the Ministry of Finance indicate that the deficit was $7.3 billion, 5% of GDP. This is 2016. No COVID, no pandemic, no lockdown, no shutdown, no breakdown, no state of emergency. Failed policies creating misery for the people and ensuring that the supply of foreign exchange would begin to diminish and create a situation where businesses would be forced to shut down. Additionally, the country's international investment position deteriorated on account of noticeable declines in direct investment. In light of the country's lower earnings of foreign exchange, because of the low energy commodity prices, foreign exchange purchases from the public by authorized dealers declined, even back then, by 13.2%. From 2015 levels. Central bank sales to authorized dealers also declined by 31.4% in 2016. This is an indicator of an economy shutting down, slowing down, job losses, a government that was lacking in the ability to generate income, to diversify. All of this here in the central bank report. Fast forward to 2019. Reading again, and 2019, please, is before COVID. From the Central Bank Bulletin of 2020, let's note here that the Central Bank Governor is not the neighbor and investment partner of Kamla Persad-Bissessar. So let's read the report from the Central Bank. Preliminary data for the first 2 months of fiscal 2019-2020 show that the central government incurred a deficit of $2.6 billion compared with a deficit of $1.4 billion in the corresponding period 1 year earlier. The deficit was primarily on account of lower revenue, which outpaced the decline in expenditure. Revenue collections fell by $1.4 billion to reach $4.0 billion at the end of November 2019. Lower earnings was reflective of a simultaneous fall-off in both energy and non-energy receipts. What does that mean? The entire economy before COVID was shattered. Even the jewel of the energy sector that required just autopilot and maintenance was crumbling under the decisions of the PNM government to shut down Petrotrin, to shut down the refinery, to put 5,364 permanent workers permanently out of a job, to remove 6,100 temporary workers, to put pressure on the fence line communities, businesses across the board. This was showing before COVID. As a result, heavy reliance has been placed on both domestic and external borrowings. So the government was unable to create different revenue streams. The energy sector was collapsing, not booming, and the non-energy sector was not showing growth, it was shrinking. So what did the PNM say that they would do? They needed money, so borrow to spend. They placed heavy reliance on both domestic and external borrowings, leading to a sharp increase in public sector debt. At the end of September 2019, before COVID, the public sector debt outstanding stood at 63.2% of GDP, compared with 47.1% of GDP at the end of September 2015, an increase of some 16% as the PNM borrowed.
Senator Roberts, you have 5 more minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me just move on. The double Dutch disease, The perpetuation of the reliance on oil and gas continues under this PNM. No ingenuity, no creativity, no understanding and respect of the different resources that we have. For foreign exchange earnings, zero diversification of the economy, heavy import bill, and it has landed us where we are now. The depletion of the Heritage and Stabilization Fund as opposed to the enhanced contributions leave the economy vulnerable. Fast forward. I heard and I read the Honorable Minister of Trade and Industry spoke about $100 million US injection for importation of basic food items, pharmaceuticals and essential items in the Newsday, printed in the Newsday, Monday 1st April 2022. And a second injection of $100 million US to the Exim Bank to facilitate local and manufacturing and exporters. What I asked the Honorable Minister, if she ever speaks again or talks to some other colleagues, what was the shortfall? So it's very interesting that you tell us that you inject 100 million or 200 million and for specific uses, but what was the shortfall? What was necessary? How many millions did we need? Because if my baby, 6-month-old baby, requires 40 ounces of Infamil milk per day, and I am only able to give the baby 20 ounces of milk per day, eventually, due to that deficit in calories, my baby is going to get sick and eventually die. So just giving us these big numbers without us knowing what is required, what is the norm, what was needed, is really giving us just numbers to hold. In the Guardian, February 3rd, the Chamber of Industry of Commerce survey said that less than 50% of the US required by 66% of those businesses surveyed was being given. So if you have a business and you can only get 50% of your requirements, is it shocking that over 6,000 businesses have collapsed and shut down in the last 20 months? There were job losses due to these businesses shutting down. So to tell us that you are injecting some US into the economy without telling us how much was needed is really information that goes nowhere. It was very ironic to see the Honorable Minister making this speech as she was there as the main invitee, the guest, the main speaker at the opening of a massive Massey store in Brentwood. I'm happy for Massey stores and the big players, but the people are suffering. I would have preferred to see the minister there taking a photo up with some of the small and micro enterprises who had received US dollars from this facility. If the PNM had left the Trinidad and Tobago economy on autopilot, we would have been better off than we are with them at the wheel. Tourism in Tobago between 2014 and 2016, there were 97,000 international arrivals. By 2017, 2018, that dropped to 17,000 international arrivals per year. Then the collapse of the sea bridge even collapsed the domestic tourism. The energy companies and energy sector have left Trinidad and Tobago. We have no foreign direct investment for the last 2 years. We are suffering at negative 439 million US. That means that companies and investors are taking their money and running elsewhere. This is not a good sign for Trinidad and Tobago. This needs to be reversed and reversed quickly. The PNM says that a foreign exchange is critical, but yet the foreign policy of the PNM turns us somehow away from our major trading partners, the USA, Canada, and the European Union, and towards Venezuela, Russia, and Iran. So I need them to explain that change in foreign policy and how they expect that to impact the foreign exchange supply that we need. The foreign exchange crunch exacerbates crime because if small itinerant peddlers or small business people or the small man on the street who utilizes US to supply their or to add subsidiary income.
Senator Roberts, your time has expired. Senator Dylan Remy.